Hello and welcome to GIS tips and technical resources from the Esri Disaster Response Program. This is the last in our series of incident management and disaster preparedness webinars and another of our series of public safety webinars to promote the use of GIS by public safety agencies. Today's webinar will help you identify apps and whether configurations are appropriate for heavy use by your team to present data to the public and the media and help you manage your incidents. We'll discuss how to find additional data resources for various natural hazards and discuss how to quickly launch additional capabilities based on the needs of your incident. So a couple of housekeeping items. There is a chat function in the GoToWebinar panel. Please use that for any questions. Any questions we don't get to during the webinar, we'll follow up with an email to address those issues. You'll also be receiving an email with a link to the recording of this webinar along with the resources that were presented that you may access. And there are two handouts in the GoToWebinar that you can access now to review some of the resources that are available to you. We're very lucky to have several of our public safety personnel with us today and primary members of our disaster response program that represent decades of service during type 1, type 2, or day-to-day incidents supporting public safety dealing with these significant events. I am Mike Cox. I'm your Director of Fire and EMS Solutions for Esri. Come to you after 27 years in a metro-sized fire department on the East Coast. And I'll turn it over to Ryan, our Director of Public Safety, for an introduction. Ryan?
Hey, thanks, Mike, and hi, everybody. Ryan Landcloss. I'm the Director of Public Safety and Disaster Response here at Esri. My background is in state government and local government. Been with Esri since 2006 and have the great honor of leading our disaster response program efforts here at Esri that we'll talk about today, which is our operational arm responding to crises and incidents of all types and sizes globally. So it's great to be with you today. I look forward to talking with you. Jeff, over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Yep, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Jeff Barani, the Emergency Management Tech Lead at Esri and part of our disaster response program. Been here over 20 years. Over to you, Fern.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm Fern. I'm Esri's Wildland Fire Specialist. I've been working in fire for over 20 years. There's a lot of 20 years here. And I'm going to jump right in and get going. So I want to thank everybody for attending this last webinar in our series. It's really hard to believe that how fast this spring has gone. As we were getting ready for today, we were looking back at all the great information that's been shared this spring and decided to do a quick recap of the previous 3 webinars in the series. You can find all of the recordings of these in our webinars in the Public Safety Webinar recording page. And you'll receive that link in an email and it'll be available at the end on the slide of resources. So when you're on that page, scroll down to Fire, Rescue, and EMS, and the ones related to this series have a subtitle that says Incident Management Disaster Response. So that's how you can find them. So we kicked this off a few months ago on March 24th with incident development and reporting using GIS. During the first webinar, Esri staff presented examples of how GIS can be used to improve situational awareness during an incident. We also shared relevant information on ready-to-use templates from ArcGIS Solutions and a slew of other resources to get you started. Renee did a demo including showcasing the wealth of data layers available via the ArcGIS Living Atlas and how you can combine those layers with incident data in a web application builder app using the situational awareness widget to query that data and to have a better idea of what's happening on your incident. She also demoed how we can use community analysts to report on and identify the impact of the incident. During the first 3, we had guest presenters. I was thrilled our first guests were members of the Southern Area Type 1 Incident Management Team. They respond to some of the most complex incidents around the country. Jeff Adams on the right, a situation leader on the team, and Manadad on the left is the team GISS or GIS specialist. They both joined us to share their experiences responding to wildfires, hurricanes, and other incidents, and how they use GIS during those responses. Manon shared the Experience Builder application he created as a landing page for all of the apps that he's made for his team members to use. The top 5 apps you see on the list here are standards that he uses on every incident, and he just moves them based on the extent and the location of the incident the team is responding to. And then incident-specific apps he'll add as they get created, such as for wildland fire suppression repair. Continuing on, the second webinar on April 14th focused on operations and specifically on GIS tools for the field. Esri staff talked about decision-making based on data, the variety of mobile applications, and which ArcGIS solutions are helpful for viewing data being created and modified in the field. We demonstrated ArcGIS field maps for field data collection, and we really highlighted and focused on that offline capability. It's rare to have perfect cell service, especially during an incident, no matter whether you're in an urban area or in a rural or forested area. So it's important to be prepared for offline work, and then data can be synced when sufficient cell connection is reached. Our guests that month shared about using mobile applications in operational workflows. They're both members of the National Alliance of Public Safety for GIS and that Search and Rescue Working Group, or NAPSIG. Paul Doherty and Jared Doak shared their work in SAR and USAR and how GIS has helped with that work. They have fantastic resources available on an ArcGIS hub, and those leverage Quick Capture, Survey 123, and are shared via the hub, along with training resources. They did share some of their challenges with standards and with working with such a diverse community in terms of where their skill sets are. So even if you don't work in search and rescue, the concepts they shared can be applied to any of the response types. Moving on, the most recent webinar last month on May 5th focused on using GIS for public information and stakeholder engagement. Esri staff discussed using the ArcGIS online apps for communicating incident information real time to the relevant audiences and how those products can scale for high demand or viral views. We also talked about crowdsourcing and discussed how you can use existing resources and plan ahead to convey information to avoid recreating the wheel or replicating work that others have already done. Jeff demonstrated creating a story map from start to finish using publicly available resources. Our guests were from CAL FIRE and work on the damage inspection team, most commonly called DINS. Frank Bigelow and Will Brewer shared the background to the DINS program. They shared the challenges and they gave some fantastic demos and explanations to things they focus on when sharing the data publicly, such as disclaimers, language standards, and how they share to other stakeholders within the state of California and people who really rely on having access to that data. All three of these previous webinars were fantastic sessions. I highly encourage you to check them all out. I personally have rewatched most of the demos multiple times now. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Ryan to talk about the Disaster Response Program.
Excellent. Thanks, Fern. I appreciate the background and really kind of recapping the three previous webinars that we're going to build on today. Again, welcome. We're glad you're with us for the last in this series. Hard to believe we're on number 4. And today we want to talk about some of the tips and tricks and provide you with technical resources that really build on the 3 previous webinars to go a deeper level down to understand how to configure applications appropriately, how to make sure your applications work in a viral environment should the news media pick it up, and all that really coming together around this disaster response season that we're in. Certainly looking right now on the Gulf Coast, 30% chance of formation, down in the Bay of Campeche, looking out west in the drought conditions. We certainly know in the US it's about to get busy. And so we want to try to prepare all of you with resources to really help you move forward quickly, applying all the lessons that you just heard Fern describe as well as add on to today. So for context, we want to start by introducing the Disaster Response Program to you here at Esri. Number 1 is a resource so that you know that it's available to you should you need support and help at any point in time moving forward. And also then for context about some of the lessons that we'll share with you today. Back in 1994, the Northridge earthquake in Southern California was the first time that a group from Esri deployed out at the request of a local community to help with mapping the impacts of the earthquake, understanding structural damage, understanding where to put resources and how to help the community itself recover. And we really look at 1994 as the first time that this program started to take shape. Certainly where we are today in 2021, we've learned a lot. We've been through a lot, just like each of you learn as you go through incidents and different types and sizes of incidents you support. You apply those lessons moving forward. We do the same. Now, for the past 27 years, that's taught us about a lot of different activities. One of the things that I wanted to kind of talk to you is just before we go there is just about the program itself to make sure you know what the program can provide you. The first is obviously access to ArcGIS software. So if you have a need to supplement your ArcGIS infrastructure to scale up your licenses support, damage assessment or a surge of volunteers that may be coming in. The program is meant to help you in that response phase of the crisis to really make sure that you have what you need at your disposal to ensure that you're giving the best solutions available out to the community that you're working with. The second main part of that is workflow. We're going to talk a lot about that today. So best practices, where do you start by implementing workflows and solutions that can give you a baseline of readiness, but also to make sure that if you are in the process of deploying something like a damage assessment or a search and rescue application, and if you need help understanding how to configure that, how to make sure that data is flowing appropriately from disconnected devices in the field back into the operations center environment, that we're here to help you with that workflow implementation to ensure that the processes that you're following, the tools that you're relying on are delivering the right information flow. The third major area that we support is access to geospatial data. That's through the Living Atlas of the World content that Fern just talked about, making sure that you have access to all the demographics and social vulnerability data, as well as real-time content around hurricanes and floods, and all the data that's available from the community itself. It's also through our partner organizations, folks like DTN Weather Service, to provide you hyper-local weather, higher fidelity weather than you may find in public sources. So we can help you augment your existing data by providing partner data, by providing Esri data, and connecting you as a switchboard, if you want to think of it that way, to others in the community that may be providing resources during an incident. And then finally, the fourth main area that we work against is technical support. So for all of you that are Esri users, relying on these applications in mission critical environments, we understand that they have to perform, that they have to work when called upon. And so our team is there to support you 24/7, escalating things into premium support to make sure that we are getting analysts and the folks that know the technology, know the product on the phone to help you triage and support those needs that are being experienced in real time. So how do you access this program? Well, the easiest way to do that is just to remember the URL you see on the screen, which is esri.com/disaster. That'll take you to our website that lists all the resources above. It'll actually break down by hazard type, current incidents that we're responding to, resources that are available for those incidents. And specifically in the top right corner, you'll see a big button that says request assistance. It's also on the main banner, so you can't miss it. By clicking that button, it'll prompt you to fill out a quick form. Tell us a bit about the incident that you're supporting, what support you need from us. That goes into our queue 24 hours a day, is triaged immediately. You'll get an automatic response that we've received your request, and that will then start the process of moving us along to support whatever requests you've submitted. If you can't remember that address, I would also encourage you to just jot down the email alias you see on the screen at the bottom left, disaster_help@esri.com. That reaches our team 24 hours a day as well. So if you can't find the website, can't remember how to get to it, or just need to shoot a quick email off and ask for some support that we can backfill, feel free to send us an email at any time as well. So our hope is that you'll use this as a resource to find additional capabilities, to learn some of the best practices that we are going to talk about today. We list a lot of those on the website. Jeff, in a minute, will talk us through that process. You'll actually see some of the GIS resource hubs that we have organized by specific hazard types as a place to just really get you started in a baseline of preparedness for the forthcoming season. Now, let's talk about what we've learned over the years. Let's start to transition into today's session, which is how can we be better prepared for whatever is coming next? Well, 2020 certainly stretched all of us, I think, to the max. No matter if you were responding to wildland fire on an incident management team, if you were working in a state and local operations center, a business and a continuity supply chain perspective, we certainly know that COVID-19 stretched us to the limit. Our team activated last March, so a year ago plus now at this point, at full scale. So we brought all resources to bear across Esri. We follow ICS. We scale up and out as we need to appropriately. This was an all hands on deck, full scale activation across Esri, supporting more than 5,000 organizations that you see on the map here with support. Those four major areas that I just described, I think a lot of you have probably experienced those different levels of support in many ways in your own communities. You've seen obviously the Johns Hopkins dashboard, which we call kind of the situation awareness tool for the world at the moment, but also those local communities and probably things that many of you have been active in are providing the same type of situation awareness, the same type of solutions that provide your local community, your local jurisdiction with insights into the pandemic. Now, the reason I kind of wanted to start here is certainly it's a level playing field. I think all of us have a frame of reference to look back on the past year. But it's also because this pandemic, even though it's certainly maybe a different incident type than many of us have had to experience or respond to before, actually reinforces the three patterns that Fern really led off with. The ability to get good situational awareness in real time, the ability to connect to the folks in the field who are doing vaccination distribution, or even communicating effectively like the Johns Hopkins University did with a map and a dashboard to convey complex information more seamlessly. It really showed us that these patterns that we see over and over again, even in the context of a global pandemic, just continue to be the baseline that we should be striving for as achieving our readiness level. But there's also a lot else that's happened in the past year. Certainly many of you have been activated. You've responded, as I mentioned, to a very active fire season in the western part of the US. Globally, though, we saw earthquakes in the midst of the pandemic, looking in Zagreb, doing damage assessment using the same mobile tools that we described earlier in the session, helping to make sure that they can actually put people in the field, collect information in the field, structure by structure, reporting that back to the operations center in real time, while also considering social distancing and the effect that the pandemic has on operations in real time. Another good example from 2020, looking back, was technological hazards like the Beirut port blast, where we saw teams globally being deployed in for search and rescue activities, not only using the technology that we were talking about today to get situational awareness by looking at post-event imagery, pre and post-blast, to really understand the landscape that's been affected, to manage the search and rescue activities, to manage the need of resources and requests from that community with mobile tools that allow each of the individual actors to play their part. And in this case, be able to collaborate and share information amongst organizations, both on the ground as well as globally being supported through the United Nations and other organizations as well. Tremendous examples of GIS being supported, and we're happy that we can provide some tools and guidance to really help these teams excel at what they do. So as a frame today, let's move forward. So let's take all of those lessons that we've just learned. Let's think about the three main pillars that we've built on for this series, and how do we take all of that into action today? So we're going to cover three main areas. The first is we want to share with you the common operational challenges against that 27 years of history. I think these will resonate with you as a place to give yourself a true kind of assessment of readiness as you move forward. And then we're going to show you solutions that you can deploy today to help you build that level of readiness for the next event. We're also going to talk about best practices. So a lot of what we get called into for the tech support that we provide or for workflow implementation is about good configuration, making sure that maps and apps scale, making sure that devices work in disconnected states, making sure that your information can be exchanged securely. So we're going to talk about some of the best practices that you can take to start configuring your tools to work in this austere environment. And then the third, we're going to leave you with just a launch point going into the season for hurricanes and for wildland fire and for drought. We're going to give you a tour of the new GIS resource hub for the disaster response program, where you'll find plenty of maps, applications, data sets, and examples to really help you start to think about where you want to go next in your operations. So let's start at the very beginning, which is how do we make an assessment of our readiness? Looking back again over the three webinars, they mirror the results that we've seen over the last 27 years of requests. We do after actions after each incident that we respond to. We talk to our users, we hear from you directly, right? So I encourage you to keep that communication coming, because it helps us understand not only the needs that you have in terms of responding to incidents, but also make sure that our technology is working the way that it should. And over that 27 years of history, we look back and we decided, after 2017, which before the pandemic was our busiest year on record, it was multiple hurricanes, Irma, Maria, so forth, moving through the Caribbean into the coastal part of the US, that really stretched our resources. And it showed us that we needed to help ourselves understand the patterns that people kept asking for, the workflows that were continuing to be asked over and over, no matter what type of event, so that we could help build solutions around that and ultimately help train and educate the broader community at large the value of GIS tools. And they really boil down into six main things. I would say that these are obvious to almost everybody on the phone here, and they should be. How do we understand the potential impact of an incident, whether that's a forecast that's coming for a hurricane or a drought season, fire season, to we're in the midst of it right now, the tornado has just struck, how do we understand, or the blast has just struck, how do we understand the impact of that on the built environment, on the citizenry, the residents of that area? How do we then estimate and deploy resources in the appropriate ways? Not only understanding how many we might need to respond to that based on the potential impact or the impact, but truly then, where should we deploy those resources to have the most impact that they can on life and safety? How do we continue to monitor rapidly changing conditions? So whether that's stream gauges and the flood that continues to rise, the hurricane forecast that's changing, hour by hour from the hurricane center, all of those rapidly changing conditions mean that we need to make sure that we are changing our planning assumptions in real time as well. So connecting that data together into dashboards and tools that allow us to truly get insight. And then how do we assess and report damage? So we're in the field, we're operating, how do we actually make sure that the data is collected in the field, being reported, is flowing back in, and then providing real-time operational briefs to our partner community, to our elected officials, and eventually to the public and media as we communicate effectively on when we need them to take action, whether that's shelter in place, to evacuate, or to get prepared in advance of a storm making landfall. I would say that these are the starting points for all of us today to do an assessment of our readiness. If you have tools and technology that support these 6 main areas, then you are in a better place for tomorrow. If you think there's a gap, let's talk about how we can help you get there with some solutions and tools that provide a baseline for your organization today. So I'm going to transition to Jeff at this point. We're going to talk about each of these 3 main pillars, if you will: maintaining situation awareness, the ability to conduct damage assessments and field mobility, and the ability to communicate and manage the flow of public information. Jeff, over to you. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Ryan, and thank you everyone for joining today. Now what we like to do is go through a demonstration, kind of illustrate some of those, kind of concepts that Ryan, talked about, and some of the things you've learned about, previously, in this webinar. But I guess, before jumping in, I just wanted to echo the welcome of the team. Thank you for attending. Thank you for attending today and taking time to prepare for the next disaster, prepare for the next crisis, and hopefully you learn something and take away some, resources to better enable you. So with that, I'm going to jump in and start with a kind of a demonstration. And what we want to look at here is going through a scenario of how we can kind of take those lessons learned, that Ryan shared, and really kind of apply that. So in what we're going to be looking at here is we're going to go through a scenario based on the Calwood fire, incident outside of here in Boulder, Colorado last year. So they're just going to use this as an illustrative example. This is not actually the tech and the data that was used, but certainly I want to give a shout out to the team in Boulder that did a great job with that response using similar tools. So the first kind of capability that's important to look at here is from a situation awareness perspective. So here what we're looking at is seeing our incident status dashboard with the current state of the incident. So we can see the fire perimeter here in green. We can see some of the evacuation zones that have been set up, the shelters, the road closures, that type of thing. But what's really important here is that, not only do we have information on from a mapping perspective in terms of the current state, but we also have key performance indicators to go along, with this. So at a glance, we can get a sense of what's going on, the number of, open shelters, the current, occupancy, road closures, that type of thing. So all that's really kind of important from a situation awareness perspective. Now, obviously there's a lot of operational information here that is important for our response, but we can combine this with other live feeds of information. So for example, there's weather warnings and watches in the Colorado area right now, an air quality alert thanks to the fires in Arizona. There were tornadoes nearby just from a couple of days ago. So even just pulling back out, we can see some of the value of the live feeds that were talked about on some of these previous webinars to show combining all of this information together to give you quickly at a glance a sense of what's going on, either in this same view as we've got here, or by adding in other map elements here to your dashboard to be able to quickly look through the smoke forecast, COVID cases, drought conditions, that type of thing. So again, the first kind of key capability from a situation awareness perspective is having incident status dashboard here, like you see here, all ready to go with your information and data for when and if disaster might strike. Now we can help keep that information up to date with the operations response viewer. So really the idea here is think of this as really an editing application that we can give to a limited group to be able to keep all the information for the incident up to date. If there's new incidents that we need to add, or operational elements like roadblocks or road closures, we can certainly do that and help keep the information up to date. We can also edit existing data here. So for example, if I want to change the status of this shelter from closed to open here, update any information on the occupancy with just a couple of quick clicks, I can do that here. If we need to change the status of our evacuation posture, for example, we can also do that very quickly with this application. So for example, if we need to move this from this particular area from pre-evacuation to mandatory evacuation, I can do that now with just a couple of quick clicks. And again, this type of viewer is limited in terms of who has access to be able to make these status changes, but it's an important capability that we can provide to our operations staff to be able to communicate and update the status. Now, and hopefully you've seen that it's not too terribly hard to do. And so think about how you may be able to kind of deputize more GIS staff in your operation or your jurisdiction to help you keep this information up to date. And then doesn't necessarily have to be the GIS staff that make all of these edits. And so now if we go back to the viewer, we can see the incident status dashboard viewer. We can see that some of those changes have been reflected. Our number of shelters has gone from 5 to 6. Our shelter occupancy has increased. And we can see that the evacuation status has now been updated here as a part of the map. So continuing on the tour, the next application that we'd like to look at here is the situational awareness viewer. So really the idea here is giving people the ability to get an understanding of the potential impact of an event, especially early on within the incident. So for example, in the window here, I can pick my incident, the Calwood fire, again, as an illustrative example, and with a couple of quick clicks here, I can get an assessment and the idea of the potential impact. So for example, we know that there's 37 address points from the 911 database here within the perimeter of the fire. We can see any other values at risk that may or may not be impacted. So luckily no campgrounds or transmission lines or natural gas pipelines, any of the values at risk information that are important to you can all be quickly summarized here in the map. And so this is really important to be able to get an understanding of the impact early on. Now we can use this viewer as a simple way to be able to share this type of information, or we can also create a quick report of this information and share this out or email this to others. So with a couple of quick clicks here, now it's going to go out and create a report for us that's going to summarize all of the information, including any attributes that we want to include, both kind of the summary and details, as well as provide a simple map. On a side note, when we were sharing this with emergency management personnel one time, they stopped us and they were like, Jeff, are you telling me that I don't have to wake up GIS staff in the middle of the night to be able to get a better understanding of the impact of an event as we're trying to communicate to FEMA the impacts of the fire? And it kind of caught me off guard, and I had to step back and say, yep, sir, yes sir, absolutely, this is certainly something that you can do and not necessarily have to go through GIS staff. And I thought that was really a telling point in terms of the value of this information, and obviously great that the GIS staff can get more sleep now by providing these type of capabilities to others within their operations. So continuing on the tour, another kind of key capability that Ryan mentioned is looking at things from a damage assessment perspective. So in this case, in this scenario, we can see all the results of the damage assessment that's already been conducted in the field. We see the different types of damage of what's been impacted already. We can see the list of address points here that have been collected, along with the summary of the potential impact based on the surveys that have already been conducted in the field. Now this can be paired with information coming from survey 123. So really, again, the data coming in from the field and the ability to collect that very quickly and effectively in the field instead of a traditional paper form or something like that. So fill out the appropriate elements of the details. We can capture our GPS location here on the map. The other kind of an important thing that is important to do here is as we are doing our surveys, we can make sure to get the cursor right over where we're collecting. And as you'll notice here, as I'm zooming in, I'm seeing additional details that are being provided. I'm seeing the address point as well as the parcel information. So I'm just adjusting the point here to be well within inside the parcel, and as well as the building itself that we're doing the survey. And why that's important is that what it's automatically looking up the parcel ID, the address based on the location of where we clicked, and any other, information that we want to pull from other GIS layers can get automatically populated here as a part of the work, and certainly reducing the number of clicks that are needed for teams in the field, as well as providing, additional valuable information on the data that's being collected. So I just fill out a couple of other quick clicks here. Obviously, photographs are important to associate right here with the record. So as we're, taking photos, perhaps from different, sides of the house and the like, we can go ahead and associate that right with the record. And when we're complete, we can, go ahead and send our changes, and that this will synchronize either with the cloud or your servers that are available there locally. Now, this damage assessment, capability and tool will work with whether you're connected to the internet or not. So if you don't have connectivity or cell phone are out, all the devices, or excuse me, all the updates will be stored here on the device, and then once connectivity is reestablished, those changes can be synchronized and pushed forward. So and some of the things to think about in terms of the additional resources that we provide, there's some additional details there, is going ahead and caching the information in terms of the base map on the devices, so your teams can have context in the field, and that's just kind of a best practice to have that ready to go. And there's some additional details in the documents to be able to show that. So now that our changes now are synchronized here, we can see now that the updates are available back here in the dashboard. Our entry is shown here on the map, as well as our indicator information updated as a part of this assessment and this information. So another key capability that's been updated recently with Survey 123 is the ability to generate reports. So now here I'm looking at the back end, the ability to generate reports quickly based on the summary information from this environment. So I won't take the time to run a new report in the interest of time, but with, again, just highlighting the capabilities with a couple of quick clicks. Again, summary report information based on any summary data that you want to provide, the number of buildings that are impacted, the extent of damage and the like. That's another key capability of Survey 123 that we find many get value of for using applications like this. Continuing on the tour of capabilities, we want to look at things from a public information perspective. So this is the new Nearby app that's built on the JavaScript 4x API, which is pretty responsive on mobile devices. So the same ideas here with sharing information with the public, a message that can be communicated to the public in terms of instructions or any additional information from the communication staff or public information officers, give the public the ability to type in their address or click a location on the map, and now help them really easily and clearly understand, hey, am I in evacuation zone or not? In this case, provide any additional situational awareness information like the live air quality alerts that we're seeing right here. We'll just type in a couple of other addresses here. So in addition to telling them, in this case, in this next address, that they're in no area of evacuation, but also sharing with them any additional resources to help them. So in this case, any shelters that are nearby that are in proximity, and any additional details that are provided here. So in this case, obviously, we're looking at this information here, on my laptop. But as I mentioned, these applications work well on mobile devices. So that same app that I'm looking at can now be viewed in a mobile device in a much more kind of responsive environment. So we can see not only the map information, with a couple of quick clicks, as well as the details. And it works, very well here on a mobile device, that especially from evacuation perspective, many people may be coming in from mobile applications as opposed to their laptops. And so we just wanted to highlight that this is what that same application looks like, but in this case, viewed from a mobile perspective. So the final app on the tour is a briefing application. So again, we've seen story maps be a great way to roll up a lot of different applications, a lot of different data sets, and kind of a one-stop shop to be able to share this with decision makers, to be able to share with elected officials, or perhaps to use for briefing purposes to kind of walk people through the various aspects of the response. And now in this case, this particular example is organized along the different apps that we've shown here, but this could just as easily be configured to show the chapters of however you want to tell that story, whether that's emergency support functions and the various ESFs like ESF1 transportation, or community lifelines from a FEMA perspective, or the different elements from an ICS perspective. It's really kind of up to you in terms of how you want to share this information and make it available more broadly. So that kind of concludes our tour from a application perspective, and really kind of highlighting the three capabilities that Ryan mentioned: situational awareness, public information, and damage assessment, and really highlight the ability of the solution templates that are available to you, available for you to configure, and give you some sense how these could be used, in this case from a fire scenario, but these could just as easily be a wildfire or earthquake or severe weather scenario, different types of events. The same workflows kind of apply across the board. So a couple of notes in terms of getting started with this. Again, there's a couple of links. These are some of the solution templates that are available that you can use using the Solutions app to deploy this and provision these capabilities within your own organization, so you'll be better prepared. If you need help from Esri to do this, there's a couple of different channels to make that work. So next, I'd like to transition and share with you some tips and tricks for better preparedness from a disaster response perspective, and share with you kind of across those three kind of capability areas some new and evolving trends that may be helpful for you, and help maybe give you some ideas how you can further refine the configuration of these apps to meet your operational needs. So the first element that we'd like to talk about is dashboards were recently updated, and they provide the ability to have conditional formatting of lists and indicator widgets with Arcade. So in this particular example, from a stream gauge perspective, you can see that there's more fidelity in the data that's being exposed, and the elements are colorized in different ways based on their different flood stage level. We can also highlight things with dates and links more prominently. So there's we really see Arcade as a great way to kind of trick out your dashboards, if you will, and provide more information to your users and consumers of this information. So there's definitely some resource links available for you in the handout that get into more detail and looking at things from an Arcade perspective. Our next tip here is to design for mobile first. So we certainly showed an example of that in the demonstration, and how most of the newer Esri apps, like the Nearby app, which is a part of the Instant Apps collection, work well in different form factors like mobile devices. So we definitely encourage you to test this out. Many of the new apps have different configuration options and experiences to help you make sure that your information, your mapping information, your messaging will work well for your consumers, who may in many cases be on mobile devices, whether that's an Instant app that you see here, or Experience Builder, or Story Maps as we showed in the last webinar. Also wanted to highlight that there is a nice blog article about having a single intelligent URL for two different dashboards. Dashboards are more kind of complex, and you in many cases probably have to design a dashboard for a mobile device and design a dashboard for a desktop device. And this is certainly something that the John Hopkins dashboard that Ryan mentioned had done, and was a great kind of best practice. So that's another link and resource link that's available to you to be able to see what that was done there. So again, designing for mobile first is a best practice that we'd want to highlight. Moving on to things from a damage assessment perspective, as I mentioned, using custom JavaScript functions, which is a standard element of survey 123, you can use that as a mechanism to pre-populate fields in your survey based on where someone clicked on the map, like the parcel ID or the address or any other information that you want to pull from other features. That's a convention now that's pretty easy to set up. It kind of looks worse than it really is. This is the back end within the spreadsheet, where it's essentially using a function to pull data based on where someone clicked to get the values of the field based on where that user entered. So in the field now, we can pre-populate, again, parcel ID, address, zip code, what other key functions that are there. In this case, this is address information from parcels, but this could be any layer, whether that's ownership or values at risk, whatever the case may be. But we see this mechanism within Survey 123 being very valuable for many folks. Another key feature that is recent is giving your surveys more context with map links. So again, now within Survey 123, you can associate web maps to share additional information like the parcels and address information and the like, and have that be able to show up now as people are collecting information. So a great way to provide more context to your users in the field that you are collecting this information. As I mentioned, summary reports are now a new recent addition to the surveys and their function, especially from a summary perspective. And so again, you just simply configure your Word document, your Excel document with the values from the feature service, or essentially the table that you want to collect and populate as you're sharing information here. So pretty easy to configure as a part of the process. So our ArcGIS Online product team has shared a couple of best practices and resources with you that we want to share with you. Again, the links to these blogs are in the resource links handout that are part of this webinar. And a recent publication from just last week from Mariana on the team is about public data collection and backups. And really through this, she highlights how the team has put more effort into making sure that you can't share layers that are editable by the public. That's obviously a best practice. We don't want the public making changes to your data, and there's ways of ensuring that this doesn't happen, and more safeguards have been put in kind of behind the scenes to make this work. Certainly that's highlighted in the blog, as well as some additional information on considering backup options for your data layers. There's another great blog that's essentially best practices for viral apps. This came out sometime last year, talking about leveraging feature layer views as a way to share read-only versions of your editable data, and talking about the CDN cache that is set up, and making sure that you set the time interval for the cache control to align up with your data edit, so your applications can scale and handle a viral load. Talking about not including any relative date filters, and using conventions like in the last day and that type of thing. So some other great best practices here. Also noting that if you do have applications that have heavy concurrent editing or heavy offline synchronization of maps, that consider the feature premium feature data store as a part of the options here to handle that. Again, I also wanted to highlight there's some great resources to help you design apps with accessibility in mind. There's a great set of links here for you to explore, and you'll note that the development teams have done a lot more to add in accessibility and Section 508 type of tools and functions within inside many of the apps. Like, for example, the alternative text here within a map element in the story maps that we showed from last time. Again, from last year, we saw hubs be very popular from an information sharing perspective, and really kind of helping take the information from official sources and information, putting data and apps in context through initiatives from a hub perspective. And so that's another best practice that we've seen many of you leverage. And then finally, securely sharing information in a multi-agency fashion with Hub and Hub Premium, and that's really facilitated by group membership. So for example, if you're sharing information, obviously your built-in or enterprise login users can have access to that information. We can add others from different organizations into that group, and kind of a bring your own identity type of approach, and having shared memberships in that group. And then another really evolving trend is extending the kind of to the world of have-nots, people that don't have existing ArcGIS Online credentials, and leveraging the users within inside the Hub Premium org to be able to have shared access to this secure environment to share information, data, and apps. And again, this is a growing trend that we've seen throughout the emergency management and public safety response community. Now, in the last thing is a recent update with a partnered collaboration in the April release makes that much easier. So, before the April release, it was only kind of one side of the sharing kind of tunnel, if you will, where assigning people who could, have access to this information. So with partnered collaboration, you can have collaboration coordinators on either side of the arrangement here to be able to add people into the groups as appropriate to kind of facilitate access to a secure kind of notional disaster response community ArcGIS Online group. So that's a great new addition to the ArcGIS Online tools to be able to add into your capabilities. So again, those were kind of our some of our top 10 tricks and tips and tricks based on recent updates to a lot of these apps to be able to help you share this information. Again, a lot of resources available to you in that handout to be able to explore and move on and leverage these as a part of your work. And so this is the handout that's again as a part of the resources. So the last thing here is we wanted to, as Ryan mentions, we wanted to take you through a tour of some of the GIS resources that are out there through our response hub. And so the team has done a lot of work to start to organize content for the major disaster types that we support: hurricanes, earthquakes, flooding, severe weather, wildfires, and recently added drought to the collection. As someone from an emergency management agency told us the other day, or shared with us, someone commented in their organization that drought is the next COVID, the next prolonged response that many of us will be dealing with. So that was a recent addition here. So I wanted to kind of take you through a tour of what was included on one of these pages. So first of all, we kind of followed a lot of the lessons learned from the COVID response hub from last year and brought a lot of those design elements forward as a part of pulling this together. Some summary statistics here at the top this is basically pulling from data layers like the number of tornado reports in the past 24 hours, in kind of a pyramid type of a design, or inverse pyramid, where and what we mean by that is having the key information that people are looking for up top, the key apps and data sets that are important, the ability to look at additional applications. So there's gallery cards here for kind of the greatest hits, if you will, and links to go out and look at additional applications that we'll show in just a minute. In the similar vein, looking at things from a data and maps perspective, what are some of the key data feeds that are important from both Esri and the Living Atlas, as well as partners in the response community like NOAA, who's added a lot of great layers lately, and then additional data layers to give context, both base data from high field open and a variety of other sources, as well as including and highlighting some of the health, racial, and social economic data that we've really that the Living Atlas team has curated over the years. For each of the disaster types as well, there's also a kind of a tearaway map, if you will. So in other words, there's a map that you can launch into full screen that provides a web map that's ready to go with all of the Living Atlas feeds that are available to help to let you kind of pour in your own data into these various sets of applications and to be kind of off and running. And then finally, some resources at the bottom, as well as social media feeds to be able to share information with you. So each of these hub pages within this hub site are organized in a very similar fashion and have additional data and apps to help you look at and provide capabilities for you. So for example, if we wanted to look at things from a public applications perspective, we can now click on this link, and what it's going to do is it's going to open up a filtered gallery app that we can now look at. Hey, what are some of the federal applications that are out there? What are some of the Esri apps that are out there to show kind of examples for each of these different disaster types, and looking at things like the new media app that has animation now as a part of the function. So in this case, we're just looking at a forecast precipitation animated over time with some of the data and information here. Some other elements to highlight are the new portfolio app. So this portfolio app came out in the April release of ArcGIS Online, and basically lets us flip through a collection of maps or apps very fast, and looking at different data types, whether that's the the storm prediction center outlooks, or fire weather outlooks, or looking at forecast tropical cyclone probability and that type of thing. So there's a way to kind of cycle through all this information, as well as kind of look at things from an autoplay perspective. So this is one of the apps and data sets that's there as a part of the portfolio app, which is a recent addition. So I guess additionally, there's more elements from a data set perspective from each of the different disaster types. So if you're looking at hey, where can I go and add in additional data for the types of disasters that may affect me in my jurisdiction, you can certainly do that here, and have kind of a catalog, if you will, or a phone book, if you will, of available data sets and live feeds, both from Esri and the community, like NASA Disasters Program, NOAA, USGS, and others, to be able to share this information. And finally, I just wanted to show as mentioned, that drought has now been added as a part of the collection with different current conditions, as well as various drought indexes and forecasts and seasonal outlooks and that type of thing. So certainly encourage you to explore those resources that are here on the hub. And again, links for the hub page are included in the handout. Here's a couple of key links here, and with that, I think we're getting towards the top of the hour. So I wanted to turn this back over to Mike now to be able to kind of close us out here. So over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Jeff. Wonderful presentation. I know all the attendees just received a large amount of information, so just be aware of the links that Jeff showed in the handout. They're available currently in the GoToWebinar control panel, but you'll also be receiving an email with a link to the recording of this webinar, so you can review it when needed. And also the links will be included in that email as well. So a couple of quick questions, and again, if we don't get to all your questions before the end of the webinar, we'll definitely follow up with an email. But the first one is, I'm going to throw it to Ryan, and Jeff, maybe you might have a follow-up. But Ryan, the question is really about IoT connectivity and being able to map IoT data to support command and control, whether it's from IoT devices or mobile applications or whatever it might be. Can you speak to some of the capabilities related to IoT data?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, good questions. I think certainly the proliferation and readiness of this data now to be consumed in a geographic context just continues to increase. We actually just recorded another webinar series. We'll provide a link in the chat, and we'll make sure it gets in the email coming out to you, which is around this new product we call Velocity. Think of it as a way to put listeners against the IoT feeds that you have, whether that's flood sensors, like aerial sensors and the like, to be able to then articulate that into a map-based interface and then take action when a sensor reaches a certain condition. So we did a little webinar around how to take that real-time feed in context, combining that with the data that like Jeff showed, which is real-time weather forecasting and the like that comes in from the Living Atlas. I think you'll find that really useful as a context of combining both your network with readily available data in real time through dashboards and be able to move against business rules that you set in the case of that. Jeff, anything you want to add, Phil, please do.
I think that's great. Yeah, just think of Velocity as a tool to turn your IoT data into GIS layers that you can add to your map and add to your app. So yep, that's great.
Yeah, good question.
Great, thanks. Fern, one for you. Can you describe what resources are available to develop fire perimeters, or where you can pull data to help build those visual displays related to wildland fire perimeters?
Sure, Mike. I think that, there's a ton of resources out there. As Jeff was showing, there's the hub page specific to wildland fire. Esri has a wildland fire website that has a lot of resources on it. For fire perimeters in the US, you can go to the NIFC open data site, and a lot of these resources are available and linked to from our website.
Great, thanks, Fern. Jeff, back to you. A couple of survey questions. When you're pulling data with JavaScript from a feature service, can this be done by Survey 123 web forms?
At this time, that it cannot. You can't use JavaScript functions from Survey 123 web forms. You need the app to be able to do that, and that's for security purposes.
Understood. And similar vein there, when collecting public information through Survey 123 or one of the other mobile applications, is there a way to add a step in the process for an administrator to review and accept or deny edits before it's added to the data set or to the mapping products?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a way to kind of have a QA, QC, process and move that along. In fact, there'll be a significant update to the damage assessment template here in a couple of weeks, and those workflows for having kind of an approval process are built in to the updates that are coming in the damage assessment update here in a couple of weeks, and I definitely encourage all of you to check that out.
Great, thank you so much. We are getting to the end of the webinar here, and I just want to make sure that you had information on some upcoming events. Our UC is occurring in July 12th through 15th. It is virtual once again, and we will be having public safety special interest groups, or our SIGs, on Thursday, July 15th. So please register for that and join what was last year about 80,000 folks that attended the virtual user conference. We are planning our public safety summit and public safety and security summit in late fall or early winter. So look for more or additional information on that. We have an emergency management operations solution webinar, and that's going to be presented in multiple time zones. So if you're international, you'll be able to pick a time zone that's most appropriate for you and your staff. So that'll be coming out on the webinar website soon. And then our next webinar series is a series on resilience, and I'll turn it over to Ryan to give us a good explanation of the resilience webinar series. Ryan?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yeah, we hope you'll join us in the next series coming this starting in August around building safe and resilient communities. Certainly, I think we've hit on some of the topics today, the fact that risk is more systemic than ever before. It's more than just the natural hazards in front of us, but truly understanding, vulnerability at a different level, look at the interdependencies. So we're going to spend a series together on 3 different topics. One, understanding and really assessing risk and vulnerability. The second around how we can then design effective risk reduction strategies and mitigation priorities that are inclusive of the community. And then finally, how do we communicate the risk that people face, like personal risk for individuals and for households, to drive change and change outcomes in the future. So we hope you'll join us and look for that coming later this fall. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Ryan. And yeah, some great content in that upcoming series as well. We certainly want to thank you for attending today's webinar and the previous 3 in the 4-part series. And if you did not attend those previous 3 sessions, please go to our public safety webinar page and review those. As Fern described, some excellent guest presenters that are doing real work during incident response that you can learn a lot from. Here's our contact information. Please make a note of that. And any of the questions that we did not get to during the webinar, we will follow up directly with an email to the questioner. I want to thank you for attending the webinar series and look forward to meeting you or reaching out to you again soon. But thank you. Have a good day and stay safe.